Okay. Hello, everybody. We have a very special guest today. We're super excited to have her. Her name is Trish Barillas. Trish, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you.
We're
This is
so
our
happy.
first podcast in English, so we're very excited. Hopefully, first of many.
Yes, indeed. It's our first ever podcast in English, so we'll for sure stumble here and there, but we're super excited. Trish, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I am a New Yorker. I've been living in Manhattan for 23 years now. Both my parents are Guatemalan. I grew up in Long Island, which is in New York, and I've been coaching for 18 years now. I'm a diehard New Yorker, so I have not left, but I visit Guatemala all the time, probably about 4 times a year. And I have lots of different things, lots of former lives that created who I am today. And I'm just excited to share all of that with you guys.
You said you're a coach, and we hear that word being thrown a lot lately. What type of coaching do you do specifically, and what was your experience becoming a coach?
So I got my BA in psychology, and I always knew that my calling was to help people from a very young age. I feel as though I was coaching probably my whole life. I just didn't really know it. And when I was looking at grad schools, I didn't really like the theory and the everything has to fit in a box of a diagnosis to become a psychiatrist or therapist, which they're much needed. I just didn't think it was right for me and my path. So I actually ended up going to a life coach. And within the first 10 minutes, he said to me, you should become a life coach. And that really was it. And then I went to NYU. I got certified in life, personal, and career coaching. I graduated in 2006. So this is before platforms, before Google, before everybody had access to anyone in the world. So I was 20 at the time, 26, and no one knew what a life coach was. And it was such a struggle to try to build my business, but it was always a side hustle. So now, 18 years later, my specializations are anxiety, breakups, relationships, and job advancements.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think like you were way ahead of your time because I'm even surprised that there was even like this option at NYU back then. Because I feel like, well, I mean, we were younger, but I don't think that like back then the coach was such a thing. So I think that that was kind of
It
great.
wasn't. People thought
Yeah,
that I was crazy, right? They were like, okay, so do you coach a team? Do you coach?
yeah,
Like, it didn't make any sense to anyone, but I just knew if I stuck with it, it was going to work for me.
yeah.
And when I graduated, they were, our teachers told us to make brochures because we didn't have access to anything online. So, and then they said, don't put your picture because you look too young. So at 26, I looked like a baby. So they were like, don't put your picture on it. Don't do this. Don't do that. And for 9 years, my primary demographic were men. So for
Wow.
9 years, my whole
Interesting.
coaching practice was men. And it was, and they didn't know what I looked like. So everything was via phone.
Interesting.
Really? That's
Yeah.
really interesting. Yeah.
Wow. And what specifically do you coach on? Because I think life coach is such a broad topic. What are your specifics or what's your client profile?
So it changed, right? So initially, when I started out, it was relationships, breakups, and job advancements. I actually did a lot with job advancements, especially people trying to figure out what their next move is, trying to get a promotion. And then as media improved, as wellness became more open to talk about, then I really went into anxiety. And so now I would say my biggest demographics are anxiety and breakups. I still do job advancements, but I think people know me more so as an anxiety coach. So that's what I do primarily now, most of my practice. And it's amazing because it was something I never wanted to talk about when I started out as a coach
Why
because
was
I
that?
the stigma. There was such a stigma on
Yeah.
anxiety. what it exactly was, people that were getting medicated. The stigma is like, oh, well, you should just be able to deal with it on your own, and you should just fight through it and breathe, or whatever these, these solutions were, but it wasn't anything that worked. So as I did my journey, and as I got really more aware of like what the anxiety was and how I could be of service to other people that experience this, then it was like the floodgates opened, and then pandemic hit. And then that's when everybody came for anxiety. I didn't take clients for almost a year. I was so booked out.
Wow. Yeah, anxiety was through the roof for a ton of people in the pandemic. Let's define anxiety, because I feel like even for me, I could sometimes it's hard for me to distinguish anxiety versus stress, and sometimes they can be the same thing. But how do you define anxiety?
So there's healthy anxiety, and then there's dysfunctional anxiety. Healthy anxiety is if there's a situation, a stimuli, or an event that is
Mhm.
creating this stress that can cause anxiety. When you remove that event and or stimuli, then the anxiety will decrease. Dysfunctional anxiety is when you can't even pinpoint what it is, and there's nothing to remove. Your body is seeing XYZ, whatever that is, as a threat, and you're having a very physical and mental response to it, and it consumes almost all of your waking hours, and it can even disrupt your sleep. I've woken up with a panic attack in the middle of the night, and I'm sleeping. So the difference is really about, is it situational, and that would be in like the healthy bucket, or is it something else? And stress can create anxiety,
Yeah.
right? And then anxiety, if you have a ton of anxiety, it creates stress. So they go hand in hand.
So I think what's very powerful about like what you do is that you actually experienced anxiety, and obviously still do. I know this is something that you can't really like cure. You just kind of learn how to manage and kind of live with it. So I think that that's really part of why you're so successful, is because you know what your clients are kind of feeling. But take us back to like when you first realized that you, and again, I want to be like very conscious of how I say, like, I don't know, experience anxiety, or what's the, because I heard a podcast with your husband, and I know that there's like specific wording, like, is it right to say you have anxiety, or is it you deal with anxiety? What's like the
I think it
right
depends on
terminology?
the person, right? It depends on what their experience is of anxiety. So I'm an anxious. So I always, the words that I like is, I never say normal. People always say, oh,
Yeah.
I just want to be normal. I've never met a normal human in my life.
Yeah.
And there's anxious people, and then there's non-anxious people, and we're not the same. We're not built the same. We don't think the same. So you can absolutely experience anxiety. You could have anxiety. I think all of those terms are actually correct.
Okay.
When I first experienced anxiety, I was about 7. That was my first panic attack. And it was hell on earth. And they still are. Like, the same way I get a panic attack at that age is the same way it comes now. They're not very different.
Yeah.
And it's scary. There's 2 different forms of panic disorder. One is the fear of losing control, and the fear of having a heart attack. They're very distinct. And mine that I have is the fear of losing control, like going crazy. So when I first experienced it, the world around me got very weird and fuzzy. It was almost like I wasn't in reality. And I
Yeah.
felt like everything in my body felt foreign, and I was going crazy. I legitimately thought, this is it. And at 7, that's such a weird thing to have happen to you. And my parents are immigrants. They spoke Spanish. I spoke English. Communication between us was actually quite difficult. So I was kind of left to my own devices. And thank God I have a sister, and she really helped me through so much of it. And then I just taught myself. I would go to the library. This is like back when we had card catalogs. I'm sure you guys don't know what that is, but you would like get a book, sign it out, write
Oh,
it.
yeah.
So I would be in the corner reading these books on the brain, and I wouldn't take it out because I was embarrassed and I didn't want my parents to think that I was crazy, because that's what it was. Oh, you need help, you're crazy. Like that was just the kind of terminology and stigma. And my parents, they've had really tough childhoods. So nobody went to therapy, nobody got help, no one talked about anything. So I just felt like I was on an island by myself. And then that's where I knew I was different. I just didn't realize how different.
Interesting. Yeah. So you mentioned like your parents and your relationship, how they had like a different upbringing. Do you think that like part of anxiety comes from maybe like generational trauma? Is that even something that can cause anxiety, or not necessarily?
And that's a very spiritual sense. I am a
Yeah.
very spiritual person. I do believe that that can be a source, right? Generally with anxiety, it's either genetic, so it's
Mhm.
passed down through somebody else in the family. It could be from trauma. And it doesn't have to be severe trauma where it's like rape or molestation, or it could be whatever's traumatic to a child,
Mhm.
right? And how they interpret the world. And then also drug induced, where, you're doing X
Yeah.
amount of drugs for so many years. So for me, my dad has anxiety. So he has panic disorder, and his is having a heart attack. And if you asked him, he would say that he's completely normal and he doesn't have this. He does. He absolutely does. And so I definitely inherited from him. And I do believe there's a lot of generational trauma just from what my parents themselves went through.
Yeah.
And that was something that I still always work on. And it's always a work in progress. But I do believe that it can be another source of why anxiety can exist within somebody.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you were saying around the stigma. Both of us from born and raised in Guatemala, it's still a very conservative country, very machista, and there's still a lot of stigma attached to even just therapy. Like I know, and I've heard it a lot, the sentence being like, "Oh, I'm going to therapy because," like they have, it's almost like you need to provide an excuse or like a reason for going
I
versus just
actually,
working on yourself. Like it's
yeah,
totally
I don't
okay.
mean to cut you off, but like actually this weekend, I was telling some people, they're older than me, like a lot, that's another generation, but I was like, yeah, I'm starting to go to therapy. And they were like, well, no, I just like, I have my sisters for that, or I have my friends for that. And that's fine. But I think it's again, like that stigma of like, why are you going to therapy? Like you could just, and I think, um, we talked about it before our call. And then when I was having this conversation this week, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize how, like, how different it is here, because in the US, I feel like it's starting to become a lot more not accepted, but like a lot more people are opening up about it.
Yeah, I
Yeah, well,
feel like
it's the
people are
norm.
normalizing it.
Correct. It's normal for someone to say, I have a therapist, I have a life coach, I have a shaman, I have an energy healer. That's all so much more accepted. In Latin countries, I feel like because of their their generational trauma, everybody just sucked it up and dealt with
Mhm.
what was happening, or you suppress it, right? But what happens is that it affects their children, their children's children. So you have to break that cycle. And with my family, I mean, so much trauma. And I felt like I'm not going to continue the cycle. I will do absolutely everything I can to make myself better, to make even help my dad understand himself a little bit more. And I've noticed I've gotten a ton of more people of color that are now clientele or clients that are seeking coaching, a lot of Latinas, which makes me so happy. When I go to Guatemala, uh, my parents will say, "Oh, I have this friend. They want to come talk to you," because it's almost like a secret. Like they're
Mhm.
coming to talk to you. They just want to chat. And I'm like, I've never met this person. What are you talking about? And they won't say to me, but then I realize, oh, it's anxiety, right? And then all my cousins, which there's like 300 of them, they will, if they're struggling, they know they can talk to me. And I wrote a book. I've given them my book on my, a face of anxiety. So I think that it's getting a little better. There
Yeah.
needs to be significant more progress made, but I think that the younger generation are getting it, right?
Yeah.
And parents don't need to understand, and their well-as don't need to nobody needs to understand. You just always have to advocate for yourself and for your own mental health.
Yeah. I
How
was
are
gonna
you
ask you,
advocating? Oh, Adri, go ahead.
no, just I just had a question about like, because your parents came from Guatemala, you grew up differently than them, like you grew up in the US. So when you started doing this work, like what was their reaction? I know I think you brought an interesting point, like they don't have to understand, because I think in our Latin just culture, we're always like kind of seeking validation or approval from like our family and our friends and like everyone around us. So I love that you said like no one really needs to understand, like you do what's best for you. But what was your parents' reaction at the beginning, like when you first started to do this work?
My father said that I was crazy. That was his exact wording. He didn't understand it. He felt like they didn't come to this country so that I could be a coach, right? I
Yeah.
had to be a lawyer, a doctor, a therapist. Like it had to be what
Yeah.
their bucket of, success.
Mhm.
I am the black sheep of the family. I don't do anything the normal way. I ran nightclubs for most of my life for 13 years. So I just kept going, right? And also, I think it was easier for me because they were taken out of their context, right? They're
Yeah.
in America. They don't speak the language. They don't understand rules and regulations. So I was always self-taught. I had to, my sister and I had to figure out schooling and tests and what they needed to learn. They didn't know how to, manage their checkbooks. And so we were teaching them. So I felt like
Yeah.
because they were taking out of their country, they were almost like my children. So they
Interesting.
just
Yeah.
kind of were like, all right, well, she probably knows better, so we're just going to leave it. However, if I grew up in Guatemala, it would be so different, because then I'd feel like there'd be so much of this upper hand and they would be so grounded in what went down and how I was to be raised and what I was going to learn. So I had a lot more privilege because I grew up here. And now I would say after my book, after just a lot of things that I've done, my dad is always asking me like, okay, I have a question for you since this is what you do. And I'm like, I can't coach you. You're my father. This is not, no, this doesn't work. So
Right.
now I get it, not fully. But I always say people don't need to understand why. And you don't need to convince them, right? They just need to support you in whatever your choices are. And then you continue the work, right? So I've always continued the work, no matter what people have said to me, whether they thought it was a lucrative business or not. Um, I just kept going.
And now he looks up to you, which is nice. But you carried a
Yeah.
lot of like the responsibility and the weight, from what you're telling me growing up with your sister, for your parents. So, and you also had anxiety. So how are you advocating for yourself back then? Like, how were you dealing with this
I hit
anxiety?
it. I hit it. I suffered. I
Wow.
suffered for a long time. It was really hard. Anxiety um, within children, right? It's not as pronounced. And again, I'm not a medical professional, but through my research, my own personal experience, it generally will come out around the 20s. So you move away to go to college, you realize, oh my gosh, I have to be an adult. There's responsibility, things change, right? When you're younger, things are very formulated and structured. So when things are structured, someone who's anxious can really flourish in the world. Without that structure, we kind of come apart. And if there's too much time on your hands, like an idle mind is an anxious mind, right?
Yeah.
So when I hit college, that's when it all went downhill for me. And I was just living in one panic attack after another. I was 20 and I weighed 78 pounds. I was really
Wow.
sick, because my anxiety, when it comes, it's almost like my body shuts down. I can't eat, I can't sleep. I'm in fight or flight. and nothing can really pass through. So my college told my parents that I had to go to an eating disorder facility, which I didn't have an eating disorder because I love food, but my anxiety was so intense. And that was something they didn't understand. So then I found an anxiety specialist on like an infomercial at like 3 a.m. A lot of anxiety sufferers have problem sleeping, like getting to sleep, putting themselves to sleep. All the thoughts come in, things become scary. And I found this infomercial, told my parents that I think I know what I had. Then I found an anxiety specialist, and that's when things started to connect. But before that happened, I remember calling my sister because she was at college, and I told her, like, if I can't live another day like this, like if I can't get help, I don't know if I'm meant to be in this world. That's how bad I was suffering.
Wow.
So it was really intense. And she came over right away, and she helped me. And my parents were mind blown because they didn't know that I'd suffered so much. They didn't realize it was coming to the point of like, I don't know if I want to live anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And that was like at 17, that was really heavy. And then finally I did a ton of therapy, some wrong, some right. But then I still suffered until I was about 35. So even though I learned a lot, I'd been through all these types of therapy, it wasn't until 35 that it finally clicked. And I found the right therapist, the right psychiatrist, and then my life became so much easier.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's a process, right? Just like with anything, because even if you don't suffer from anxiety or, depression necessarily, even if you're just going to a therapist, it's always a process to kind of find like the right person for you. Because you need to align with that person, you need to feel comfortable with that person. And sometimes it takes like more than, 1, 2, or even like 5 tries.
I would tell people to, when they're looking for a therapist or psychiatrist, treat it as if you're dating, right? Make sure that you are interviewing them, make sure it feels right. And if it doesn't, move on, right? You got to move on because it's important who you align with. And there's a lot of different types of therapy. So you have to also make sure you're picking the right therapy. There's there's millions now. So doing the research on what works for you, what you're suffering from, and what might be the right therapist, that's half the battle. And then the other battle is going through it. And that's not easy either. And a lot of people jump ship because they're just not ready.
Yeah. I know you've been open about like taking medication, and I think we could like talk a little bit about that. Before I did want to ask, just like, because you're a coach, how do you usually work with your clients? Like, I know maybe some of them are also simultaneously going to psychiatrists, or how is that dynamic between like your clients, and then how do you help them versus like their therapist or maybe psychiatrist if they go to both?
Yeah. So 95% of my clients are also in therapy and or have a psychiatrist. So the difference between psychology is that you're dealing with past trauma and you really go all the way back. So from your formidable years, age 7 to where you are today, and they really leave no stone unturned. And it's in order to provide a more stable future. Whereas coaching, I deal with where you are currently. So let's say you're like 33. I don't go in the past. That's not my job. I don't go into trauma. It's goal focused. So everything with coaching is accountable. So there's an accountability piece, there's homework. So my clients have to show up and do the work. And we're always going towards something, and it's solution based, right? So we're not uncovering. I usually say that therapy is about the why and coaching is about the how. So it really depends on what stage you're at and what you're looking for. But with coaching and therapy, there is going to be some, crossover, but they are significantly different. So for my clients, they love homework, which is very odd because most adults don't want to do more work, right? We have our jobs. But if I'm like a day late, somebody will say, I didn't get my homework. So, and the point is the homework is also more of putting that action on you, because we do what we need to do in our session, but then I need you to still do the work when we're not together, and then to be accountable and say like, oh, look here, I showed up for myself. I did XYZ and this is how it felt, or this is what popped up.
Yeah. I guess it's good because it's also like how bad they want to feel good, right? Like they want to feel good so bad that they are willing to do that work, right? And that's like really the first thing for anyone really to like be able to kind of cross that bridge or like get to a better place.
Yeah. Generally, when people come to me, they've tried everything else. They've exhausted all other avenues, and I like that challenge. I appreciate it, and I'm willing to take it on. If there's a client that doesn't fall within my specifications, or I feel that they'll be better suited for somebody else, I will absolutely refer them out.
Yeah. What is one thing that anxiety has taught you about
I was
yourself?
about to ask that thing.
Man, it's taught me so much. Anxiety is not all bad, right? I think a lot of people feel that anxiety is this horrific thing that they want to pray away or wish away. A lot of people with anxiety have their skills and their personalities because of anxiety. I'm really so detailed. I'm so focused because I'm always trying to figure out, okay, worst case scenario. I need a backup plan for my backup plan for my backup plan, right? So anxiety will make you very successful in certain areas of your life. But when it hits in a dysfunctional sense, yes, it sucks. What I learned is that I didn't need to be so scared, which is such a hard learning. And there's a statement that I love, and it's called pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And
Mhm.
I chose to live in pain for most of my life. And I didn't know I was choosing it. Right. And just because you're anxious or you suffer from XYZ doesn't mean that you can't have a fulfilled life, but you got to work at it. Right.
Yeah.
It's managing, it's understanding. And what I learned is that when I have a bad day, let's say I have a panic attack or anxiety's through the roof, I don't bring it into my next day. I just say, all right, that was a bad day. It's going to happen, but it doesn't set me back all the way and say like, oh, I've been doing all this work. I'm so frustrated. Why is this happening again? I might feel that way in the moment, but the next day I realize this is what I have, right? It's a disorder. It's something that's never going to leave me. So I just have to learn how to work at it. And that was a really big learning for me.
It's almost like it's a choice. Well, everything is a choice. Like you choose, you obviously don't choose to have a panic attack or have anxiety. Like you don't choose that, but you choose how to, like what option you want to take with it. As you said, like, do I want to leave it in this day or do I want to show up for myself the next day and I'm okay today?
Right.
Um,
You can choose your reaction to things.
exactly.
Right? We can't choose
Exactly.
what happens to us,
You
right?
choose
But
how you react. Yeah.
yeah. So, and people internalize a lot and attach a lot. And that is something that I think all humans have to unlearn is, okay, we don't have to attach to everything. And we tend to be very negative, right? Lots of negative self-talk. Why am I should be at a different place in my life. Why is this happening to me? I wish I was this. It's very negative, which is why my title is creator of positive change, because as we become adults, we're jaded, and we need to focus and live more in the positive than we do in the negative.
Yeah. I think that's one thing I'm just like working on now because I feel like as you become adults, like there's just like all of these things. All of a sudden, it just feels like everything. I don't know. You have all this responsibility, and you're now more aware of a lot of things. And I guess it's like problems that have always been there, but like as we grow older, we're just like, now we have more responsibility. But it's that like at the beginning, I remember even like family things, like they would affect me so much. And I think it's also just learning like, okay, like what do I want to do with this? Like, right? Like, how do I want to move forward? Like, how do I want to react, instead of just like being numb and not being able to kind of deal with it. But I think it applies to everything, right? Like, not just anxiety, just in general, like life
Anything,
situations.
yeah, mental health, wellness applies to everything. Learning how to release things and knowing what is for you to really take on and what is for somebody else, right? Because not everything is for us, but we make everything about us, right?
Yeah.
And that's not the way it works. When I mentioned before that I feel like I've been coaching my whole life with my parents, because I was navigating this world, the world of the US, which is very different than Guatemala, especially during that time period. I really had to put myself in their shoes and not attach to certain things that they understood about their culture that wasn't part of mine growing up. That's what's always trained me. So I've always been good at separating and not attaching to certain things, because it's what I had to do just to kind of survive and understand my parents more. So that's why I was saying I feel like I've been coaching my whole life because of it.
That's
Yeah.
impressive. I want to ask, because I know there are people in my life that suffer with experience anxiety. And please correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm saying something. Um, what's the best way to deal or help them um, in a way? Like, what's the best way to show up for them if they're experiencing anxiety?
So what I always advise is when they're not in a state of anxiety. So when you feel that they might be in a calmer state or they're having a good day, ask then, like when you feel anxious, when you're having an anxiety, cycle, etc., how would you like me to show up? What is it that you need? When you're in the moment and you're experiencing the anxiety, you're not rational. So you can't even communicate what you need because you don't know. You're just trying to live through it. When you're calmer and you are of rational mind, that's when the conversations should happen, because they'll be able to think about it and say, actually, I can't talk about it when it's happening. I like to be distracted, or I like to talk about it, or they'll be able to guide you. So asking them when they're in a rational, non-anxious state, that is the best time to ask what they need to support for them.
Wow. Well, yesterday I had an anxiety episode. I woke up at 3 a.m. I couldn't go back to sleep. I couldn't stop myself from like overthinking. And I got out of the room, went into the living room, did a Melissa Wood health meditation, guided meditation, calmed myself down. And then I was like, I'll go for a run. And in the run, I think this is the worst run I've ever had. It all went back. It all came back to me. Like I couldn't calm myself down. And for me, running and yoga is therapeutic. Yesterday was not therapeutic at all. And I just couldn't bring myself to like, you have got to calm down. I came back, took a shower, and then I had a chat with my husband, and that calmed me down. But yesterday was one of those days for me that I was just like, I I need something that'll help me come back to me because I was just all over the place. The meditation definitely helped, but I think the run triggered it back on.
Well,
Um,
because you're adding adrenaline where adrenaline
yeah.
is already present, right? And with clients that are in some sort of cycle, you don't want to add more cardio or hit, because your body is just going to also interpret that
Mhm.
as threat, right? So you would have to go the opposite route and do whatever it is that is more soothing to the body. And really in the moment, what I find helpful is to write down all of the thoughts that are going through your head. Just because you feel something doesn't make it a fact. It's just a feeling. So if you could put it on paper, you start to take the power away from it, because you're actually addressing it versus literally running away from it, right? So if you address it and you write it down, then you're learning how to process and be with it, right? You could also there is, with the brain, it's so hyper focused on these threats or these stresses. So if you could shift the brain, which you could use with cold methods, what I like to do is I put a washcloth in the fridge and then I place it over my head. I lay down and then I breathe through it and then I inhale. So also trying to calm the nervous system with cooling technique has the research has said it's
Wow.
highly beneficial, and it's what I do when I'm experiencing high stress or even a panic attack, and holding something that might be cold. You could hold some ice. You'll realize it's going to go real quick, right? So even if you have one of those ice blocks or gel ice things, whatever you can do to shift your brain off of yourself and onto something externally. But yeah, running in the middle of that, I can understand why it might have gotten a bit worse.
Yeah, it was definitely the worst 45 minutes.
Oh,
But yeah, I came after that. The rest of the day it was great actually. But it
good.
was a hard morning, that's for sure. But thank you for those tips.
Yeah,
Yeah,
of course.
I was gonna say, so I know like the other day I just heard one of your podcasts and I also was like I couldn't breathe, but I always overthink. So I was like, is this anxiety? But I wasn't sure. I always have like said I'm an anxious person, but I'm actually not even sure if that's actually anxiety. So I think like, and just from Mariel's story too, like I think it could be helpful. Like, are there any, for anyone listening, like, are there any symptoms or just like feelings that are usually like common when you start having like an anxiety attack, or even just like not necessarily like a big anxiety attack, but just when you're starting to feel like extra anxious that people could like kind of identify?
The most common are heart palpitations, so your heart's racing. A lot of people, their body temperature increases, so they just start sweating. They feel like they're feeling a bit trapped. Also, their breath gets stuck right here, so it's a lot of shallow breathing. Some people will say it feels like an elephant is sitting on top of their chest, or they can't actually catch their breath. Some people, they will go to the bathroom quite frequently. Either they start peeing all the time or their bowel is going to empty. When you start to experience anxiety symptoms, what's happening is there's a group of nervous tissue that is located at the base of the brain, and it's called the amygdala. It is responsible for your fight or flight reaction. So something inside the body has sent a message to this amygdala to go into fight or flight. That's why you're feeling the sensations. And the sensations are 100% real, like it's happening. So what you the goal is, how do you calm your central nervous system? How do you not interpret what you're feeling as a threat and get back to feeling grounded? Getting grounded is going to look different for everybody, which is why I think it's important to work with people and to do your own research by trial and error. Like, obviously, going running probably isn't what we're going to do. So now we are going to try some, right? So you're going to see what works for you and your body, and that's going to be part of your toolkit, right? So with clients, the goal is, what is the physical triggers, what are the thought triggers, and now what are the solutions? How are we going to put those into motion when your body goes into the state?
Yeah, that's really
What
helpful.
are some of your tools in your toolkit that you do on a daily basis to avoid getting to that place?
So with me, so again, this is just my own personal
Mhm.
tool. So I use music. Music has always been very therapeutic and helpful when that's what saved me as a kid growing up, was music. I used to have this pink radio with these huge batteries, and I would play Aretha Franklin because that's the tape I had. And I would stick it under my pillow and I would play it in order to fall asleep, because I couldn't listen to nothing, because then the thoughts would start. So music has always been so important. So in my toolkit, I'm an old school hip hop girl. So when I get panicky, my husband will know. So, and I've told him when we started dating, because when I first met him, I said, listen, I have anxiety disorder, I have panic disorder. And he just thought, what the hell? All right, well, I don't know what this is going to be. But then he said he didn't realize how well I managed it, that he didn't even notice when it was happening. So if it does happen, I send him a text and I just say I'm in it. And he knows not to ask me questions because it makes it worse for me personally. So I put my headphones in, I listen to one of my favorite playlists. I start to walk around the apartment. I'll grab I have this crystal it's always very cold. So I'll hold that. If that's not working, then I'll go and grab a washcloth and I'll do my breathing exercises. And I also do a lot of rubbing with my left arm. And I just keep saying to myself, you're okay. You're fine. This is just anxiety. It's going to pass. And then I tell myself to stay here, meaning stay present. Anxiety lives in the past and in the future. It doesn't thrive in the present. And as humans, we suck at staying present. We have so many distractions. We go to work, we have these events, we have this, we have our phones, we've got platforms and series and Netflix. There's too many distractions. So self-soothing is one of the most important. And that's something that I really learned and try to do. And then I just talk to myself and I just say, you're okay. You're fine. You'll be fine. And those are the basics of my toolbox.
Beautifully said. And it's funny because I actually had a pink pillow that had a built-in speaker growing up that had a cable that you connected to an iPod. And I used to sleep with it because it was like a little round pillow with a speaker in the middle. And I sleep on my side. And I used to like listen to music while in order for me to fall asleep. And yeah, that was something I did growing up.
Yeah, but it's a ritual, right? So with rituals that are really important, having morning rituals, night rituals, I love this app called Insight Timer. And I pick my sleepy music. So I play that. My husband, my dog are well trained. If that's on, we're all going to bed. And it really just starts to soothe. And in psychology, there's something called anchoring. So when you're young, like babies, you get sleep trained. So you put on the mobile and it plays the same song over and over. And then you dim the lights. So now the baby is realizing, oh, okay, when this happens and I hear this, the body now starts to get calm and tired because that's the routine. So you're training the mind and body through sight and sound. So I always make sure I play the same playlist over and over at night. And then within 3 minutes, I'm generally asleep, which is rare, right? That doesn't ever happen. So if you can start to utilize certain things and aspects, especially when you're in stressful situations, you got to pull more, right? You got to do more of these things in order to find more peace and grounding. So you want to ramp that up.
Yeah, I'm definitely in one of those stressful situations at the moment.
Right. So you got to ramp up your self-care, right? You got to ramp up your rituals. You got to ground more. You have to find a way for your body to come back to the body's always asking, what's my balance, right? So when we're in stressful times, we need to do more to get yourself to a restful space, meaning I probably wouldn't be doing a lot of running. I might be doing more restorative yoga, things that are more mindful, more meditations, more breathing, and even just like nature, whatever it is that calls to you, that's what you have to do more of.
Yeah, I definitely find like sometimes we tend to like want to run away from feeling that anxiety or that whatever feeling, we feel like it's coming on. And I think we do more harm because like sometimes I think we're able to kind of like put it to the side for that moment if we're like kind of, I don't know, we can start working a lot or maybe just like being around people a lot so that we aren't with ourselves and our thoughts. But would you say there's like, and I know also like anxious people tend to be in their thoughts a lot. So like, what is I don't know, like, how do you identify that perfect sweet spot where you're not like always by like feeling those feelings and thinking and being on your own, but also like not running away from them with other situations, people. And, I don't know if that made any sense, but I
No,
just,
I think I get it. I always say to build in time to reflect, build
Mhm.
in time to worry. If you don't give it the time, it's going to come in when you don't want it.
Yeah.
Right. So if there's something that is stressing you out, give it the time that it wants and
Yeah.
say, okay, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to think about all the things that are stressing me out. And I'm going to think about how it makes me feel and figure out what can I do for my body today that will help it along. Right.
Mhm.
So maybe it's getting a massage at the nail salon. It's what, 10 minutes? That
Yeah.
might help, right? Just to break up the way that you're holding your body, right? So if your shoulders are too wound up, just being able to position your body in a way that feels more relaxed. There's so many now, there's so many options on YouTube and TikTok and IG where people are giving really quick 5-minute recommendations on, okay, how to relax, doing somatic exercises. There's so much out there. All you have to do is go find something that you like and make sure that you give it the time.
Yeah.
So if I'm really stressed, I give my worry the time that it's looking for so that I don't bring it to the rest of my day. And if it pops up during my day, I say, no, I don't have time for this, but I'm going to give you 20 minutes later on. Like after work, I'm going to give 20 minutes. And maybe I'll just walk and think about these things. Maybe I'll lay down and just try and, daydream and think about these things. But giving its designated time, I think, is always very helpful.
Yeah. That's really helpful. I think that's also like kind of journaling does that, right? Like it's just writing
Whatever,
everything down and
yeah. As long as if the intention is to give it space, because if we push things away and we don't give it the attention it deserves, it shows up in the body. It'll
yeah.
make you sick. It'll create, sciatica. It'll create tension spots. It's going to show up. You can't run from it. And sometimes it can make people very sick. So making sure that you are listening to the body and saying, okay, what is it? Why are you so stressed out? How can I alleviate it? I do stretching before bed for at least 2 to 3 minutes every night on my floor in my living room. I'll just stretch and I won't realize how tight something might be.
Yeah.
Right. Because I hold all my stress in my shoulders. So doing small things every day with the intention to give your body some release, it is more impactful than you think.
Yeah.
Doing things more consciously.
Correct.
Mhm. I know we've been talking a lot about anxiety and your experience as a health coach, but we know that you do so much more than that. And you're on the board of a few nonprofits in Latin America. Tell us a little bit about that and why is it so important for you to be involved with the Latin community and with Guatemala and supporting women in the community?
So growing up, I did not like Guatemala. I never wanted to go. It was a source of trauma for me. It was
Wow.
very scary. I grew up quite privileged. My parents were the caretakers of a property in Long Island. So I lived with this amazing Jewish family called the Khans, and they treated me and my sister like their own children. So we grew up on 10 acres with an orchard, tennis courts, pool, in one of the most beautiful communities. So I lived in a very privileged setting. And then my mom would bring us to Guatemala. And it was just such a culture shock. I took a
Yeah.
bath in a bucket. Lights came on at a certain time. There was dirt roads. And this was probably before you guys might have been born as well. But the way Guad is now is not how I saw it, right? It was just cow fields and dirt everywhere. And if you want to make a phone call, there would be a kid sitting at like the bodega, and then he would have to run and knock on your door so you could go and pick up a phone call. So it was wild and I couldn't handle it. I couldn't eat the food. I couldn't understand Spanish. It just felt so foreign to me, and then added to the anxiety. So when I got older, for 7 years, I didn't visit, never went. And then finally, on my journey of anxiety and healing, I just thought, it's not Guatemala. It's not the country. I don't know why I have this feeling or this dislike. It's not healthy. So then I went back and I made a couple of deals with my father had some land from his grandfather, and doing those deals then reconnected me to Guatemala. And I loved it. And I was going there. I went every other week for about 5 months. The deal took a year and a half, but we sold to Walmart. It was a big deal. I was really proud of myself. I was able to get my parents from poverty to, being very financially well off. So then I decided I'm going to give back. I'm going to change my experience with Guatemala. I'm going to change my perspective, and I want to do more. So then I started my nonprofit for women and children that live around my father's farm. So we have a farm in Guasacapan. So we started helping the school, our tortilla ladies, and then Mercado Global. I was friends with their head of design. So she brought me in. So I've been with them for 6 years now. But with the reason I really choose my nonprofit and Mercado is because Guatemala is one of the number one most dangerous countries for women in Latin America. And it's all on gender-based violence. And I think the statistics, which came out, the new statistic this year is that 34% of women are less likely to have equal opportunities than men. So for me, that's really important. And I just always wanted to give back, just the way that I was privileged from a family taking me on. I wanted to be able to do more for families, and my friends were all about it. So it just started as like a small little project, and then I just kept it, and then I got more involved. So the more I started, I guess, putting it out there that I had this charity, the more other charities came to me. So I worked with Ecofiltro, I've worked with Mercado Global. It's just it's fascinating. So I have a huge community built in Guatemala. So now I feel like a citizen. So that makes me feel better, and I'm going to retire there. So
that was beautiful. I got chills.
We'll retire too. I feel like with age too, like you learn to appreciate the things that when you're younger, you don't appreciate about, like, at least for me, like when I was younger, I couldn't wait to get out of Guatemala. Like I just wanted to get out and in my mind never come back. And now I'm like, no, I want to live there and raise my kids there. But I think it's like with time, you also learn to appreciate the things that you didn't when you were younger.
Well, that's the whole point of growing up.
Yeah.
You'll go through all these transitions, and it's like the place that I disliked the most, that I never wanted to go back to, is the place that feels like home to me and where I will retire. I would never, even 10 years ago, that would not have been a thought, right? And I built my parents, I didn't build it, but I designed with my architect this beautiful house, dream house. That's where I'm going to retire. And they deserve it. And that's what makes me happy. Like me and my husband are not having children. My parents are my children. Like on Mother's Day, my mom called me and wishes me a happy Mother's Day. So they are my kids, and I want the best for them. So for me to be able to see someone like my parents grow up with nothing and no education, they can't read or write in English nor really in Spanish, and then for them to have gone through what they've went through, raised 2 kids, gone to college, and then come back to their country, sell land, make money, and then provide for their family. I mean, I can't think of
It's full circle. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's full circle. And today, actually right before this call, I just found out that we just sold our another piece of property, and I'm so proud. And my mom,
congratulations.
I know. I'm so excited.
That's
Amazing.
that's honestly, yeah, so inspiring. You're sending me with the best Guate vibes as I'm moving next week
Mariel
back
is
home.
moving to Guatemala, which is part of like the whole
Yeah. The whole
crazy.
anxiety was part driven from that. Because it's been 11 years since I left. And I obviously go back and forth all the time because my parents are there, my sister, but it's, moving is stressful, moving to another country is stressful, moving back to a country that you love so much, but it's so different from the last 11 years that have shaped me as a young adult. It's a thing. It's a whole thing.
It is. You have to really wrap your mind around it.
Mhm.
It is, you can't just walk around Guatemala with your phone out, right? You can't walk around with your jewelry and things that you take for granted living in the United States is things that you can't do in a third world country,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And it's just so interesting to me that these things are still issues, and they're still, even the plastic uh, with these rivers and the contamination, the pollution, the traffic, it's all, I can't take it all in because then it gets me really
Right.
wound up. But it's like, what's the one thing I can do? What's one small
Exactly.
piece that I can do that will make a difference? And people always ask me, like, how do you even know these people? How do you get the point is, you just start and then you attract, right? As soon as you put it out, you attract it. And all the things that I've been a part of for Guatemala has come to me because I put it out there. So I think that's the beauty of it. And it doesn't need to be a game changer, but doing one thing for one person will change their life, right? And to me, that's
Yeah, no, and it starts with family too, right? Like what you're doing with your family, I think it's so great because it starts with them, right? But then like you're also helping their family, and it's just like a whole chain.
correct.
And yeah, so I love that. So I think we'll definitely also add like the link to your nonprofit and like everything you're involved with at like the description for the podcast so people can also like check it out if they want to get involved.
Of course, yeah.
And I have so many other questions, and I wish we could
I'm
keep
like,
talking for
no,
hours,
No.
but we're reaching our time. So we want to ask you some personal questions to close up. The first one is, what fills your cup? Other than music, because I feel like maybe that would have been the answer.
What fills my cup? Nature. I love nature. My dad was a landscaper, so he worked on people's estates in Long Island. So being around nature, being around my friends is really important. I don't have any family in the United States. I have one cousin, but he's in California, so I don't have anyone close enough. So for me to really have my friends as my family is important. So making sure I connect with my friends on a not a daily basis, but as long as we're checking in and I get to see them once a month, that really helps. I have a dog who I'm obsessed with. So he fills my cup. My husband makes me laugh. He like there's just, just life in general.
I like that answer. What
Me
have you
too.
learned about yourself like through your journey?
That I'm human and that I'll make mistakes, and that's okay. Not everyone's gonna like me, and that's okay too. And the people that I can help, I can. The people I can, I can't. And that there's always, your talk is what really is like your guiding light. So you have to be mindful of what that is, and that's something I've always been really good at, is being able to really talk myself through things and be my own best cheerleader and stay in my lane. So that's really been helpful, and I think that's what makes me more on the positive side, 'cause I'm very optimistic. I tend to be very optimistic. My husband, he's a little bit, called himself a realist, but I think he's a little bit of an optimist. But I think that's why it works.
Yeah,
So like,
balance each other out.
yeah, so I like that about us.
I like that.
And what has been one of your most memorable moments throughout your life?
Oh, so I love this question. And of course, my husband said, "Oh, is it when we got married?" No, unfortunately, it wasn't, because we were in Guatemala, COVID happened, the whole
Yeah.
thing got canceled. So that's a whole other story. My most memorable moment is being a birth partner to my best friend who uh, did insemination on her own. She's a single mom, and birthing my godson.
Wow.
So
That's
being
amazing.
able to see birth
Wow.
as a woman was mind blowing. I can't think of anything else that can top that. I really can't.
Wow.
That whole story sounded so powerful. Like she's a single woman, she did it by herself, but she had her best friend by her side. That's just so powerful. That's
We went
beautiful.
to classes together.
Oh, that's
I
amazing.
tend to be a little masculine, so it just seemed natural for me to be
Yeah.
one of her birth partners. But I held the right leg. So to watch the whole, I just, and it's not gross. You would think that it it's fascinating because it becomes a mission, right? Because you're like, the mission is for the baby to come out. So you're in it, and it was amazing. And I hope every woman can see another woman give birth. I really do.
I'll definitely be joining my sister's birth.
Oh, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
sister's definitely joining mine.
So we know, obviously we're gonna add the link to your book as well, to all, the podcast description. But aside from, what is something that you used maybe at the beginning of your journey or like during that, a tool, a book, a podcast, I don't know, a movie, whatever it is that really helped you and that you could recommend to someone?
So in the beginning, because I deal with panic disorder, which is on a whole different level than anxiety disorder, there's this book called At Last a Life that spoke to me, right? The book that I recommend the most now is called At First We Make the Beast Beautiful by Sarah Wilson. This book is probably one of the most amazing, beautiful, profound books on anxiety I've ever read. So I would say those two books are one of the biggest game changer for me in my journey.
Amazing. Well, we're really sad that we only got an hour with you. I think we had so many other questions. But we're so grateful that we had the time with you. I think we were both just very drawn to you, obviously for obvious reasons, both from Guatemala, but also just the work that you're doing, really spoke to us. So we're very, very grateful that, we had the time to kind of pick your brain and talk to you and get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, I love
Yeah,
it.
it was a true
I try to really connect with a lot of Guatemalans. So when I'm there, maybe we can connect and we'll do some in real life moments. But yeah, I'm more than happy to always, I'm a huge supporter of just women in general, entrepreneurs, even more so if it's Guatemalan based.
beautiful.
Well,
So next time you're there, make sure to hit me up because I'll be officially a Guatemalan citizen. Well, I've
Absolutely.
always been, but resident.
Yes, absolutely. And listen, we can go to Noquete because that is my number
Yes,
one favorite Guatemalan restaurant.
perfect. It's a date.
wait, which one was it? I didn't hear.
Paquiate.
Oh, yeah, it's so good.
Ah, so good.
Delicious.
Yeah, amazing.
Well, Trish, thank you so much. It was
You're
truly
so
an honor for
welcome.
us.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. It was great meeting you.
Well, likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
Let me stop